on the Vancouver Startup Week team. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are grateful to be virtually gathered on Indigenous land, regardless of where you are joining us from. I'm grateful to be on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. I'm privileged to live, work, and play on these lands. First, I'd like to thank you for joining us for VSW 2021, and welcome to Software Startups Getting Started with DevOps, hosted by Larry Faust. This session is also part of the VSW Growth Track and is proudly supported by Innovate BC. Innovate BC is a Crown agency that provides small business around the province with funding, business coaching, and educational content. They're helping entrepreneurs and founders start and scale their business and adapt to the changes brought on by COVID-19. So if you're looking for support for your business, make sure you stop by their booth to learn more about how they can help. And if you have any questions for our speaker, please post them in the Q&A portion of the Whova session. You can also upvote questions by other attendees, but now I'll pass the mic over to Larry and we'll begin.
Great, thanks for that great introduction, T. I have my background set to Mount Everest because today we're going to be talking about scaling your organization. If you've gotten to the point where you have your product out in the world and maybe a couple of versions have been released, think of it as having made it to base camp. It's a lot of work getting to base camp, but now you need to scale your organization to address your market. And I'll just bring up my slides. Okay, we're going to talk about DevOps, and DevOps is about scaling. I'm a DevOps coach. I've been a software developer for 30 years. Last 10 years, I've been working in DevOps, and it's a really exciting field. But what is it? It's the conjunction of developers and operators, or development and operations. It's about delivering your software from developers' desktops to your customers, and that's the servers servicing your customers. In smaller organizations and in the old style of development, delivering software was a once every quarter or once every 4-month operation. But the FANGs, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, recognize that that doesn't scale very well. And so they developed a process that we now call DevOps, which integrates development and operations into a continuous cycle of activity. Release a new version of code into production, monitor the behavior of that, fix bugs, develop new features, release new code, and just keep going in that cycle. DevOps is about making it easy to release code frequently. And just to put that in context, every piece of software that anybody develops is really about building an easy button. You don't want to make it harder for your customers to do anything. You want to make it easier. But you've hired software developers for a reason. Behind every easy button is a world of complexity. And if your developers are doing their job, they're hiding that complexity from you and from your customers so that all you interact with are the nice, easy features of your product. In the same way, DevOps is about building that easy button for your developers and your operators, bringing them together, making it easy to release code more frequently. But DevOps is not a product that you can buy off the shelf. Excuse me. You have to develop your DevOps processes within your organization. And your DevOps people will be hiding all the complexity that they're trying to deal with from the rest of your developers and operators so that they have an easier job. But today, I want to hide all that complexity too and talk about the business side of DevOps. From a business perspective, I want to talk about and address why you would be using DevOps, which DevOps features are appropriate for small companies and startups. And probably the most important, when in your development cycle, in your business cycle, should you be engaging various aspects of DevOps? Along the way, we'll talk about productivity improvement. I'll lay out a couple of service roadmaps, mostly descriptive, so that we can have some context to talk about the key features that I think startups should pay attention to. And on with the show. Why would you engage in DevOps? It's about failure modes for startups. You can fail because you don't have your financing in place, or your product is buggy, or maybe you just picked the wrong market and there's no market there for your product. DevOps addresses what I think of as a very sad failure mode. All those other things are in place, but you're not scaling. You're growing, but as you grow, staff productivity starts to go down because they have to interact with more and more people and more processes in your business. DevOps is about productivity for your software developers and your operators, and indirectly, a lot of your other staff. And if you need to have something in your head to describe productivity, think of it as revenue divided by the number of employees that you have. As your staffing goes up, your revenue will go down unless your revenue is going up. But you need to address productivity in order to scale your organization as you grow. Where should that sit in your concerns as a CTO, a CFO, a CEO? Well, clearly, market, finance, and product are your primary concerns. But right behind that, coming up fast, is productivity and scaling. You need to make sure that your staff remain productive as you grow your business, as you grow your company. What does that look like? Well, early on, when you're just trying to deliver your first product or your second version of your product, you're going to do everything you can just to get it out there. You're going to hook up a trailer to your pickup truck and load it up with lumber so that you can build your first cabin. But that clearly doesn't scale. If you want to address a worldwide market, you need something closer to a fleet of UPS trucks. But that's a huge change. Along the way, you're probably going to buy yourself a fleet of pickup trucks and start building more and more log cabins. But you need to start making big changes to the way you do business. Because as a startup, your company is going to double in size multiple times over the next few years. And if you don't change the way you do business internally, you're going to get bogged down with processes and structures that don't scale. What's needed at the C level, that's the CTO, CEO, CFO, is a productivity improvement budget. And I bring this up because although it looks obvious here, you've spent 2 years or more building your product, focused on features, trying to get it out there and in front of customers to start developing your market. And there's no room for productivity in there. You need to know, you need to remember that when your next round of financing shows up, when your market takes off and your revenue starts to increase, you need to have a productivity budget. And I've seen I've worked for organizations that have failed on this very point, and we call it feature-itis. You're so focused on the features of your product that you're ignoring or failing to recognize the needs of your teams to stay productive as your company grows. Now I'd like to shift to a more technical view of things. And again, this is descriptive. There won't be a test at the end. I just want to set the context for some of the features that are appropriate for startups. This is the large-scale model of software development and software deployment serving your customers. You're going to have a lot of servers. You need to treat them like cattle. You need to manage them. You need to build them at the push of a button. Your developers and operators need that easy button to make new servers because they will need a lot of servers. And in order to manage those servers, you need to collect information from them into a centralized place so that you can mine the data about all of those servers to determine what needs to be fixed, what needs to be adjusted. To understand this and to understand how we get there, I need to go back in time to a smaller organization and to older ways of developing software. We call this the PETS model of software development, or the PETS model of server management. You need a new server, you ask your operators to build a new server. They build a new server manually. They get to name the servers. They choose various things like names of mountains, rock bands. I've chosen cats because it's the PETS model. You need to baby these servers. You need to look after them. Each one of them is unique and created for a specific purpose. You're going to modify them, inspect them, adjust them, tune them up so that they're working perfectly for what you need. But this model doesn't scale. When you start getting more and more servers, you end up with a house full of cats. And more of your time, the time from your operators and developers, is spent just looking after your fleet of servers. And it gets worse than this. You also have a number of services that have to be attached to every single server that you have. Every server needs to report back on its health. Is it running? Is the CPU overloaded? Has it run out of disk space? We call that 24/7 alerting. You also need security for all of your services, for all of your servers. These things don't scale. So how do we bring this back? How do we bring this back to the centralized model of everything? And the infrastructure as code in the cattle yard. The key item for startups is to start with the centralized data repository. This goes by a number of different names. Your operators may call it monitoring. Your developers will call it logging, but you want to centralize that activity. This is the first thing you can do. It is by far the lowest hanging fruit of DevOps. It's cheap, it's easy. You can get open source data collection tools like Logstash. Even the commercial products like Splunk have free tiers. And when you're a small organization, they'll let you use their software for free until you grow up to the point where they will want to start charging you money. Excuse me. So it's free and easy. How do you get that into your system? You're starting here. You have pets. Great. Centralized data collection is an add-on that doesn't interfere with anyone's work. It sits off to the side. You can install it, set it up. Nobody needs to look at it. Nobody needs to change the way they do their work today. But they now have the option of looking at the centralized data repository or looking at the individual servers. And they can gradually migrate their activity to start looking at the data repository. You can also start shifting your services to use the centralized data repository. And the value here is that when you deploy new servers, you don't need to make a change to every one of the services. The services know to look at the centralized data for all of your servers. However many servers you are, you add new servers, they automatically get routed to the services that need to talk to them. And over time, your developers and operators will shift from inspecting servers directly to running their inspections through the data repository, mining that database to find the information that they need. The next step on that is building the cattle yard. And here again, you can build that without interfering with day-to-day work. If you're currently running pets, you don't need to decommission them and replace everything all at once with a cattle yard. You build the cattle yard off to the side, and over time, more and more servers are built in the cattle yard model, and you can start decommissioning the older servers as you replace them with servers in the yard. Now, this is cattle yard, and the key focus for startups is the centralized data repository. That's the place to start. I'd like to shift gears to a different view of DevOps now. This is called a dependency diagram. Items to the top right depend on and require items lower in the chart and to the left in order to get their jobs done. The holy grail of DevOps is called CICD, continuous integration, continuous delivery. This is in contrast to batch mode delivery. And in order to understand this picture, and I should say that the most important point here is continuous delivery. Batch mode doesn't scale. You need continuous processes as you start to scale up your organization. So again, we want to look back in time and to smaller organizations to see what the batch mode looks like. In batch mode, we call it waterfall development. You write a batch of new code, and then you do your system testing. You put all the code together, and you test your system to make sure the new code, the new version is working properly. Then you buy a pile of pizza. On Friday night, you shut down your service to your customers. Your developers deploy the new version of code. And on Monday morning, your customers come back to the upgraded system and the new features that they've been waiting for. This doesn't scale. This works when you've got 50 or 20 developers and a few installations out there. But when you get bigger, it really doesn't scale very well. So software development in general has gone through a couple of stages of improving on this. The first step was the introduction of Agile. Agile doesn't get us very far, but let me just quickly go over it. You break the code writing into smaller blocks that are releasable into the system as a whole. You release to QA so that they can start testing the integrated system with the new blocks of code as early as possible. This reduces the amount of time required for final system testing. And then you deliver to customers on a weekend outage or an evening outage, depending on how long it takes to deploy your software. Again, this doesn't work very well in the 24/7 world that we live in these days. So the FANGs, that's Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, in the early 2000s, introduced continuous delivery. They wanted to deliver new software to customers on a weekly basis, maybe even a daily or an hourly basis. That does happen a lot. The key to doing this is automation. You need to shift from manual system testing to automated system testing. And that reduces your system testing time from days, possibly weeks, down to hours and minutes. And this gets critical as your business, as your product grows, because no product ever gets smaller. Software developers write more code. That code is added to your existing code base. You don't just need to test the new code, you need to test all the code, because the new code may break some existing features. If you don't automate, your testing process gets longer and longer and longer. So where does this fit? Automated system testing is not something you need to do early in your startup cycle, but you need to think about it. The challenge is that a product developed without automation in mind is very hard to test. It's very hard to automate your system testing. So you want to take these two features, two DevOps features, and put them up on the shelf where people can see them and remind them that these are important. These are important objectives. As your developers design your product and architect it, they need to be thinking about how will they automate their system testing. And as long as you put that in front of them, they will probably make good decisions, and you won't get stuck. You won't get stuck with a system that's very hard to automate and spend possibly even a couple of years getting from a poorly automated system to a well-automated system testing environment. Now, there are a lot of other DevOps and software development best practices that I haven't talked about today. That's because your developers should be doing these things. The items I'm focusing on today are things that are often overlooked. So the other items, virtualize your servers. This is a best practice that's getting rolled out almost everywhere these days, and certainly in the cloud. The cloud is all about virtualization. We call them virtual machines, Docker images. There's a lot of different styles of virtualization. And I want to mention the cloud because the cloud has organized the virtualization very, very effectively. Get some engagement with the cloud, even if it's just for development, even if you plan to use an in-house data center. Do some of your work in the cloud. It will inform your developers and your development process about best practices in terms of virtualization. API-based development. You want, API stands for Application Programmer Interface. Don't worry about the details, just know that this is a best practice. Your developers should already be doing this. It's a key dependency for automated system testing. If you ask your developers about it, if they're not using API development, they probably have good reasons, but ask them about that in the context of automated system testing and make sure that their story holds water. Excuse me. Build and deployment pipelines. Your developers will need to, will automatically set up a push button way to build their product, build your product, and deploy it onto your test servers. But you want to have organized systemic automation. Islands of automation don't come together naturally into a coherent structure. If every developer and every operator automates their little piece of the world, you'll end up with little islands and spaghetti and meatballs. You need to have a systemic approach. You need to organize your automation so that it's a coherent whole and new pieces of automation fit into that system. And the takeaways for today: you need a budget for productivity improvement, and you need to manage that at the C-level. The CEO, CTO, CFO, one of those people needs to be responsible for productivity improvement for your whole organization. And it's not something you can just tell people to go away and improve productivity. You need to manage it and organize it. The conversation with your developers and operators needs to be managed by you. Those people are not, I know this because I'm a developer, they're not by default good communicators. So you're going to have to manage the communication to determine how best to spend your productivity budget. Continuous delivery and automated system testing should be put up on the shelf where people can see them and talk about them, and start getting your product design and architecture structured to make automated system testing easier. And the thing you can do now, the thing you should do now, is introduce centralized data repository, centralized monitoring and logging. You want to collect all of your information about your product, about your business as a whole in one place so you can mine that data. The sooner you do it, the sooner your developers and operators can let go of the PETS model for software development or for server management and shift to the cattle yard model. Centralized data repository is something you could do today with ease. And that's my story of DevOps for Startups. Thank you for your attention. I'm going to ask T to check on the Q&A to see if there are any questions out there.
Yep, I have one question here. So what's your opinion on companies that hire dedicated DevOps professionals versus establishing DevOps principles into every developer role / workflow? And do dedicated DevOps team cause silos and gatekeeping?
Sorry about that. I jumped ahead. Yeah, so that's a recurring problem. You need so DevOps is about systemic changes to your organization. So you need some people with those skills in order to plan out and organize how to maintain, how to migrate towards the cattle yard model, introduce the changes that you need to make. But they can't live in isolation. They can't do the job because their job is to change the way everybody in your organization behaves and the way they do their jobs. So you need one or two or a handful of DevOps people, but the software developers need to adopt the best practices defined by those people.
Thanks for answering.
Okay.
Yep.
It looks like that's the only question. So that's great. I've got a couple more slides, bonus slides, that I can just go through quickly here. Just like the Agile Manifesto, DevOps has a manifesto that describes their overriding principles on how we should do DevOps. I don't introduce that when I'm talking to people at the business level because it really just sort of muddies the water a bit. But let's go through it today. Reduce organizational silos. This is the core of DevOps. DevOps is about bringing developers and operators together to make the process of delivering software easier and the process of managing your servers easier. Those teams need to become a single coherent group of people. Accept failure as normal. I didn't mention this at all because you either have this mindset or you don't. It takes a while to adjust to this. Your product will never be perfect. You need to organize around the notion that failures will happen and you need to be prepared to handle them. always, ongoing, forever. Even the FANGs have failures all the time. We hear about them in the news occasionally. But your goal is to not hear about them in the news, to find them yourself before they reach or impact your customers. Implement changes incrementally and continuously. This is your productivity budget. It doesn't go away. You will always need a productivity budget. You can't change people's jobs, change people's behaviors overnight with the flip of a switch. Big bang changes where you tell everybody, oh, we're switching from Jira, this issue tracking system, to a different issue tracking system on Monday. That will make everybody crazy. You need to incrementally roll out changes. You need to pick the lead group that's going to try something new. Make sure everything is working for them before you roll it out to the rest of your organization. Leverage tooling and systematic automation. DevOps is about integrating. It's about, reducing silos. Every tool by itself is a silo, but you need to make systematic automation that merges everything together. Whatever new tools you bring into your system, you need to make sure they don't become isolated pieces of technology. They need to be integrated with the rest of your tool suite. That's the job of the handful of DevOps people that are planning the future. And then they need to do manage the incremental rollout and transitions from old ways of doing things to new ways of doing things. And measure everything. That's the core of my lowest hanging fruit, centralized data repository. You want to collect information about everything that's going on in your organization, not just your product, not just the customer-facing servers, the QA servers, the test servers. Monitor what's happening in HR. Find out how long it takes to onboard new staff and get them trained up to be functional. Which is another, by the way, that's another example of organizational silos, HR and development. When you're onboarding new staff, those two groups need to come together, share information about what do new staff need to learn about the organization, about the product, about the way you do work to become productive. And my last slide today is just that DevOps and productivity improvement never stops. Google 5 or 10 years ago introduced this notion of site reliability engineering. It's a step beyond continuous delivery. It's looking at the statistics of customer interactions with your servers. Did somebody push a button and instead of getting a response in half a second, it took 10 seconds? That's bad. Okay, what happened? You need to have your data centrally monitored and collected in order to get there. And then you start to run statistical analysis to see what's happening with your product as a whole. But that's way beyond. I'm just doing that to I'm just bringing this up to point out that there is no end to productivity improvement. So again, thank you for your attention. I'll be around for the rest of the week, and find me. I'm happy to answer your questions. You have my contact information.
Thank you so much, Larry, for sharing this information. And thank you, attendees, for joining in on our session.